Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Sue Hodgkinson, 30-year executive coach, founder of the personal brand company, and author of The Dignity Mindset, joins me to discuss suggestions for businesses to accommodate employees who may be struggling while working remotely while having kids at home, as well as how women working remotely can make themselves be seen and heard. Susan, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thank you kindly. Happy to be here.
And Susan, clearly a key question is how can employers, human resources, and managers support women and parents working remotely during COVID-19?
The very first thing to understand is I think the shift has to come away from, oh my God, are we being productive enough? And look instead at what's changed in how people are working. They're already working because of VideoCon at a much higher velocity than they otherwise would be. There's a much greater intensity to the day. And there's a lot more conversation going on, but I'm not sure a whole lot more is getting done. That being said, it's also really important for people who haven't for some long time had to understand what it means to get your kid up for breakfast, to feed your kid breakfast, to get your kid ready for virtual school, to make sure your kid's paying attention, to clean the house, to wash the clothes, to get the groceries. Oh, and by the way, to do a great job at work. And just to keep that in mind, it sounds like an old song. No, it's 30 or 40% more added onto the average woman's day. And I wish I could say the average parent's day, but the data still tells us that women are picking up about 40% more of the housework in the best, sort of co-parented households than are men. So the idea that we need to really understand the situation better is crucial. I do think also that benefits need to then shift to reflect and mirror what's going on. And my thought around benefits is that the flexible benefits, at the very least, if the pool can't be expanded to help people, at least in terms of dollars, at least it offers things that replicate what is traditionally women's household work. I'll say it again, the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, the tutoring, all the things that oftentimes the woman's having to split herself into 5 pieces to do. And this would become then a very meaningful relief for people, and especially women. Then remember single parents, very low income, and women, of course, not being paid a fair wage. And you really get a sense of the squeeze that people are under right now.
Right. And that's the next question. It's like, how do you redefine productivity during COVID-19? Because certainly we're doing way more work, as you had just said. So we're being more productive in that respect, but productivity as it relates to the day job.
Yeah, I think, first of all, a lot of times it's sort of a lazy offshoot, but productivity starts to look like how many meetings we were at today and how many times people saw our email and all of that sort of thing. So what I think is sort of the way to think about it is what's effective, what's the outcome that we needed to get to by what date, and start to talk to people about, is that going to be achievable? And can you do it? If I let you do it any way you want it to get that done, of course it didn't break a law, how would you do it differently? And I think what we'd start to find is that there's a whole layer of inefficiency around the political hierarchies and chains of approvals and people saying it's okay and that are unnecessary and are about artificial, balance of power that people try to maintain. So first thing I do is just ask people, what's the easiest way you can get from A to B? And let me see what I can do as your manager to do that. The second thing I think is that again, with this idea of us, 60-minute meetings, I think it's time to just throw that concept away and start to think about huddles. This topic, when we got 3 people together, but it was only for 10 minutes, might be all we needed to resolve that issue and move on to the next thing. So I think time needs to be understood differently. It's a 15-minute huddle, it's a 10-minute huddle. What does that mean? Give people guidance, and then give them the technology and the Slack channeling and the things that they can do to make the most of when they're together, either on or off a screen. But those are the things that I think are yet to be sort of something I see in the discourse.
Well, let's shift gears and discuss one of the most relevant topics in the marketplace, and that's the dearth of women and people of color on corporate boards. Why are we still having this conversation in 2020, and how can it be remedied through true corporate and structural change?
It's unbelievable that we're still having this conversation. I mean, I'm 26 years an executive coach, but for the 10 years before that, I was in corporate marketing. And right before that, I was in business school. And we were reading Rosa Beth Moss Cantor in whatever decade that was. And the numbers of women in leadership roles, Fortune 500, percentages and so forth. And it hasn't even changed since then. It's ridiculous. So we have a real issue here. One of the things going on is that um, for far too long, CEOs and boards, which have been, as we know by looking at the dearth of women and people of color, LGBTQ, people with disabilities, people that are not straight white men effectively, we know that those numbers aren't moving. And I think what happens is you look at how white men, straight white men, who I don't vilify, who I simply present as a product of the culture they grow up in, to say, oh my gosh, that gender stuff, that's the elective stuff. That's the women's meeting happening next week. That's the Black affinity group meeting over there. That's super. But it's like the whole idea has been some sort of an elective they could flirt with from time to time when it became necessary, pardon the pun. And what's been missed is that the only person I can really say I think truly saw this globally, it was a huge leader, was Paul Pullman, who used to run Unilever till the board kicked him out. And what Paul Pullman saw a long time ago was that the social ills that we are facing as societies and civilizations, one country or another, and let's just talk not about Paul Pullman and his global Unilever, but about what's happening in the US, you could see this thing coming from miles away because the racial injustice, the gender imbalance, the outright bias that continues in the world that we live in has been happening all around us, but nobody's addressed it. It hasn't been addressed effectively through the government, certainly. And so we knew it was coming to CEOs because there are too many, honestly, who are good enough, who have started to set an example of how to handle it. And so I'm hoping that, with the advent of CEOs who are willing to open themselves up to learn about this, there's going to start to be some change and people understand it's better for business to be inclusive.
So Susan, it's interesting. One of the big financial stories this week is Citigroup, one of the largest financial institutions globally, has a woman CEO who's now going to take the helm. And that seems to be such a big conversation. It's been analyzed from the top down on all financial media and otherwise. And I think part of that is our businesses they have to fight the systemic racism and sexism that exists on all levels of the organization. Why does it have to be such a big deal that she's a female CEO? Why, our CEO at Nasdaq is one of the global financial leader, and it always comes down to a woman CEO. Why can't we have this conversation around a great CEO? Why does an identifier have to be labeled on everything?
It's a great question. I mean, even in the mess at the U.S. Open with Djokovic this last week, it was a woman line judge, as if somehow she was to blame for him hitting the ball at her. And so, if you step back and look at what's going on, all of us, it's unbelievable that we are still raised with endless data coming from everywhere, and shockingly, including from our own parents, because the pay gap for kids and their wages when they're growing up and getting allowance also reflects a gender bias. What we see is that the world around us is still structured to the male gaze. And the fact of the matter is, Wikipedia, like a board of directors, is a closed shop. Think about just for a second the fact that Wikipedia, which is sort of the answer book, I think, for most of us when we go to find an answer to anything, right, that we don't know, it's a group of male volunteers who are writing and who get to decide who comes in and out, who are writing content, 90% of the content coming from men, 10% from women. And then look around and think about I think there are 15 billion biographies in English at this point on Wikipedia. And I think just under 20% of those biographies are about women. And you just have to remember for a second that that's the reality that all of us look at and think this is what is, this is our truth. So we don't see people in the course of day to day doing the things that would normalize it for us, as we would, for example, if we were in one of the Scandinavian countries, which a little bit I think get talked about too much. But the fact is, in Denmark, for example, there's not a math problem or a STEM problem for girls, because the mythology that gets told all the way along is that there was a great, powerful goddess who was great at math, and girls are taught they too can be good at math. And lo and behold, they end up being great at math. This all is a result of what is the narrative that we have in our minds and that comes out of our mouths and into our actions every single day. I mean, not to pick on him, but Warren Buffett, who I need to say no more about what he means in the financial industry. He's still the person who, when people get lucky enough to go and meet him in his office or at some event and he's a speaker and then he calls for the photo op, he says, "Bring up all the pretty girls, please." And, when the woman that's at that conference is with her male counterpart, and I know this for a fact because I've coached it, the woman just got promoted from the peer to the leader of that group. And every day in the trench at her job, after the leaders all say, "We want gender equality," and then nobody does it, this guy who got passed over is cutting her off every day at the pass in the trench in 100 different ways. And when Warren Buffett then says, "Bring me up the pretty girls," he just got what's the word, I'm sorry to say, but he received what he needed from Warren Buffett to be legitimized, was my word, I beg your pardon. And sort of that re-legitimizes all that baloney that goes on when people start walking their real walk and have stopped with the fake talk that people still bring about. But honestly, it comes down to, I was at vacation last year at a very nice resort in Florida, really nice family at a financial services conference, not Citibank, but not far away from that. And a husband, wife, and 2 little kids were there in the background. And the little kid who's 7 was screaming at his father, "Why am I a loser? Why am I a loser? I don't throw like a girl." And the father had just got done standing there telling him that. That doesn't go away. That's what we live with. So what we have to really examine is, what is the society that we are all a product of? And it's way more than, let's talk about unconscious bias for an hour and think this goes away. It's not. It's a real, coming together to look at a very deep-seated problem that is built on a model of, I need to always have more power than you. And by the way, that's why women are better and more effective CEOs, as we see increasingly, and it's because they collaborate. They're not worried about artificial power and control. They're not worried about, whose knives are coming out in the bushes for me tonight. No, they're there to figure out how to get the job done. And so you see, even in biotech, this innovation intensity where the woman is the CEO of the firm, because the style is this gifted PhD of collaboration, not one of top down, let's be sure we all know who's in control at the end of the day, which of course kills productivity anyway.
Certainly does. It was great to have you with us, Sue. Thanks so much for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thank you for having me. Have a great evening.
Thank you. And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.